Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. I am extremely excited about this broadcast this evening. It's probably one that I put more preparation into and drawn from more sources of my favorite sources than any in recent memory. So it's really important to my heart. And it really came out of a session that I was having. Most everything that I have to share comes out of the sessions that I have with my therapist and kind of the mix of that work with the work that I get to work with families in our program. So this idea that I think many of our notions, the problem is that some of our notions about what it means to be a good parent are so misinformed and they go so unchallenged in our culture. And so I brought together several of insights, like I said, several sources. I want to start off with a story. Uh, we were doing we do our clinical meetings on Tuesday with each of our programs, and I attend those now that we're doing. I can attend them all now that we're doing them via Zoom. And so I was attending the one in Oregon and the one in Utah today, and the discussion came up. Right, there was a situation in a group where a student was put in another group for a time, and there was a reaction, and there was regression, and there was old behavior, and they were describing some of the regressive behavior. And the therapists were wisely saying things like, "This is a really great assessment. It gives us a lot of good information about where the child is at. The behavior, the acting out, can kind of help us look at transitioning and how this child transitions, and because eventually, of course, they're going to have to transition out of our program." And the parents were on board with this discussion. This is not an uncommon discussion to have in our program, right? Everything becomes Christopher the Mill. So after I listened to this discussion for a long time, I said to my staff, and I shared this with the other program later on. I said, I don't want to reduce things too simple. I don't want to make it too elementary or insult anybody because it might be too basic of an idea. But I said, one thing that you can ask in these situations of the student or to the student or client, if it's a young adult, is you can just ask them how they're doing. Because it's really hard to be a human. It's hard to be a young man, a young woman. It's hard to be a human. And I think sometimes we get so focused on behaviors, we forget to consider how the person underneath the behaviors is doing. And when we reduce children or any of us to behaviors, we take away their humanity. We turn them into objects. And I know for me, in my most vulnerable, weakest moments where I've said or done the stupidest things that I've done in my life, when someone was able to see me and to ask how I was doing and to check in with what I was feeling, it made all the difference in the world. And so that begins tonight with a dramatic shift from the idea that I think many of us were taught and might still have to some extent, that our job is to raise good children, when our job is to raise a self, a human being, and first and foremost to become a self. So I'm going to draw on some sources and some quotes and tell some stories about that tonight, and then take you through some steps. This is going to take the full hour for sure. This is from my new book, The Audacity to Be You. In this way of thinking, I talk about this all the time. In this way of thinking, you don't get to be right anymore, but you do get to be a self, and being a self is so much better. I was sharing this with somebody just before this broadcast that I still struggle with this, right? There's still a theme and a culture in our family about being right that I have had a large part in creating, right? It's kind of the background, my woundedness, my history that I brought into this family. And so when I talk about this, it's an effort, a practice that I'm making myself. Just the other day, one of my children, I came in the morning on Sunday morning, and there was a half gallon of ice cream, nearly full, in the refrigerator. So it doesn't take a detective to figure out that somebody woke up, had a late night snack, and then without thinking, put the rest of the ice cream in the refrigerator, which essentially ruins it, which is not a big deal. And so I started asking the various people that are in our home living here, and everybody was denying it. Everybody by the end of my initial inquiry had denied it. And eventually, through the look on her face, it was discovered which child had left it. And I said to my child, I said, you weren't going to get in trouble for this. And I think you knew that you weren't going to get in trouble. That I thought, if anything, it was funny and an example of how we can be absent-minded sometimes. And I said, so why did you lie about it? And my child said, I just didn't want to admit it in front of the group. I wanted to wait a little while and admit it later. And it's very clear to me that it's a shame cult. It's a culture of shame, right? Like she didn't want to be wrong. She didn't want to be embarrassed. And I think it gives you it's a small example about this idea about being good versus being a self. A self can laugh at itself. A self can embrace the mistakes, embrace the detours. From the drama of the gifted child, a critical aspect of becoming a self as a parent, to showing up as an adult as a parent, is to be a willingness to kind of own and love your horrible, rotten self, like I talk about in the book. But this is from the drama of the gifted child by Alice Miller. She said, parents also have to be able to tolerate their children's disappointment, resentment, and even anger when their wishes aren't granted, when they are pushed to work out problems on their own, or when they are frustrated. A routine theme among the parents of my distressed teens is their ability to tolerate their children's unhappiness. That actually might be from Madeline Levine's book. I may have misattributed that. It might be from her book, The Price of Privilege. It actually sounds more like it, but it's from one of those two books. Wonderful books. There's work that needs to be done to be able to tolerate a child's anger and disappointment. One of the most common questions that I get asked from parents early on in this process is, is it possible that my child might not forgive me? Is it possible that they might not love me? And I explain it's not really the child's job to forgive you. It's not really the child's obligation to love you. And I explain that if they get healthy and grow up, they will forgive you not only for this, but for every mistake that you've ever made, or every mistake that you made intentionally. Right? That's what growing up means, is we lay down that burden. And what you can do as the adult, as the parent, is you can learn to listen, learn to hear them. This essentially goes at the heart of this shift in what it means to be an adequate parent, a capable parent. Is you make this shift from being good and getting it right to being a person, to modeling for them that you're a person and that everybody gets to be a person. It takes away the illusion of power that we hide behind when we think the game is to get it right or to be good, but it allows for deep connection. It builds resiliency in children. It allows them to apologize, to make mistakes and have it be okay. They don't need to lie about the ice cream in the refrigerator because somebody's going to tease them, make fun of them, or think that they're an idiot, right? And then when they show up in their relationships with their partners, they don't have to be right. They just get to be a person. And so if somebody mistreats them, they can walk away instead of being held hostage by the idea of you have to stick it out or this is the right thing to do. They just get to take care of themselves. And then when they have children, their children are allowed to be mad at them. And if that gift is given to the child, then the child gets to grow up being a person. I was explaining to one of our therapists today, that it's an irony that parents will send children to our program because they're showing depressed symptoms, anxious symptoms, self-medicating symptoms, cutting, suicide ideation, eating disorders, a whole host of mental health issues. And then among other things, we ask the child to write a letter to mom and dad that says, this is how you hurt me. This is the impact of you on me. And parents sometimes really struggle with that and are resistant. And I said, it has taken me decades to have a team of therapists that accept the idea that that's the work. That's really the work of therapy. Any program in the world that knows what it's doing, any therapeutic program in the world that knows what it's doing, is going to have a family program where the identified patient could be a husband, a wife, in your cases, the families that evoke, it's a child, has a moment where they tell the people in their family about their hurt and their anger and their sadness. And ideally, the family is well coached to just listen. to just hear it. That's the essence of what it means to be an adequate parent, is to hold space, to contain, to allow for this. And like I said at the beginning, it's built upon upon the foundation of being a person, a self yourself. So you're going to have limits to your capacity, which you then own, and you tend to. More from the drama of the gifted child. For a mother, can react. She talks about mothers a lot because this book was written, I think, in 1979. So you can think of the word functional mother or primary parent or just parent when she says mother. For a mother can react empathically only to the extent that she has become free of her own childhood. A mother can react empathically only to the extent that she has become free of her own childhood. If she denies the vicissitudes of her early life, she wears invisible chains. What the mother had once failed to find in her own mother, she was able to find in her child, someone at her disposal who could be used as an echo and could be controlled, who was completely centered on her, would never desert her, and offered her full attention and admiration. If we don't get it from our parents, from our background, or in therapy, we will take it from our children. It's not a child's job to contain a parent. It is a parent's job to contain a child. The reason that I go to therapy and tell you about the reason I tell you that I go to therapy is just because it's true. But the reason I go to therapy for the past 21 years with Jamie Gill is because I have to reparent myself. I have to allow myself to be reparented so that when I show up for my wife and for my children, I'm not trying to get something from them that they need, right? I'm not trying to get adoration from my child. And it's obviously 21 years in, I'm still going. So it's a work in progress. From the price of privilege. When we coerce, intrude on, or take over for our children unnecessarily, we may be spoiling them, but a far more significant consequence is that we are interfering with their ability to construct a sense of self. And this is the key. Intrusion and support are two fundamentally different processes. Support is about the needs of the child. Intrusion is about the needs of the parent. It's critical to get clear about your needs and where to get them met. It's critical that admiration, love, attention, gratitude, that we don't require that from our children. It's critical because they need to have the freedom to feel whatever they're feeling. Now, you can have boundaries around behavior and respect. That's fine. That's called being a self yourself. But to require that emotional input from them will come at the cost of the subjugation of the authentic self. They will lose their real self, as Alice Miller calls it. The subtitle of the drama of the gifted child is The Search for the Real Self. So that's this shift, right? It's not from getting it right and having all the lessons and all the lectures. Your kids have memorized your lectures. They give it to each other 2 weeks into the program. There's kids 2 weeks in who haven't figured themselves out, and they have all lectures memorized. I used to play this game with kids. I've told this for years. Kids would ask me questions like, why can't I go home after a Vogue? Or why can't I talk to my girlfriend? And I would say, after having tried to answer the question maybe once, or knowing that they had been exposed to that answer, or sometimes not even knowing that they had been exposed to it, I would say, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a pound of M&Ms, a big pound of M&Ms, which in currency in our world, your world and my world, is $20,000. That's what a pound of M&Ms feels like to a kid in the Willis program. So I said, I'll give you a pound of M&Ms if you can tell me, give me a reason why I wouldn't want you to call your girlfriend right now or come home right after second nature. Before I can finish the proposal, they're giving me a detailed outline of a rationale behind the boundary that is set. It's not about the wisdom that you give them. It's not about the lectures. It's not about the lessons. We teach children who they are by listening. We teach them about morality by letting them feel. specifically feel about and towards us. And when a child is allowed to feel, when a child's internal world becomes a place that we welcome and love and honor, they learn to feel. And when you learn to feel, you recognize feelings in others. You offer them that same kind of grace and kindness and love. Right? That's how morality is built. But we think it's through the lectures or the lessons. We know from child development it is this thing we call attachment. I think this next quote from the drama of the gifted child is a wonderful example of how wilderness therapy or sleepaway camp or going off to college can be a gift from a parent. Alice Miller says, if a child is lucky enough to grow up with a mirroring, available mother who is at the child's disposal, that is, a child's development, then healthy self-feeling can gradually develop in the growing child. Ideally, this mother should also provide the necessary emotional climate and understanding for the child's needs. But this is the key. Even if a mother who is not especially warm-hearted can make this development possible, if only she refrains from preventing it and allows the child to acquire it from other people, what she herself lacks, allows the child to acquire it from other people, what she herself lacks. In essence, the hopes and intentions letter, the intervention itself, and the outline that I give you for the hopes and intentions letter is this idea. It is to say to the child, I love you. For some reason, I can't seem to give you what you need. It's a failure on my part to hear or know or have it to give. And so I'm sending you to this place to evoke in the hopes that you get what you need. That's essentially I've had to do it. I've had to do it more than once with more than one child. I've had to do it when I supported my children going far, far away for college. My 18-year-old got into the college of his choice outside of New York City. And I've talked about maybe moving to New York and maybe even wanting to teach at this very university. And we talked about it. And really quickly, I realized a core ethic that relates to this principle. As I said, we talked about it as a family. And we said, I can't do it right away. He has to get away from me. He has to get away from me. I've been a father the best I can, but he'll get something. He needs something that I can't give him. I've believed that about all of my children. I remember this very child who's 18 years old and going away, hopefully going away to the fall this fall. Hopefully the country opens back up. But I remember when he was this is probably 7 years ago. He was probably 12 years old at the time. And I just finished a broadcast like this. I'd come up at that time, my home office was in my basement. I'd come up out of the basement. And there were questions that parents had. I thought maybe it's too masculine of a perspective. Maybe you're not accounting for what a mother goes through. And I was just grappling with that. And I walked upstairs and I said, maybe I'm just screwed up. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm too disconnected from my children. At the time, one child was living in Santa Barbara going to college and the other child was in Chicago or New York. I can't remember because he moved around a couple of times. And my at the time, probably 12-year-old, who's 18 now, said, Dad, how can you be screwed up if you're supporting your children and doing what they're dreaming of doing, supporting them in their dreams? And this is, these are children that I cried for days at their leaving, for days. More from The Price of Privilege by Madeline Levine. She says, we have to be acutely attuned to our own psychological issues and our own happiness, or lack of it. We have to be willing to take an unflinching look at our parenting skills. I hope this, if there's anything that I do, I hope that as I offer you parents compassion for the heroic journey inward. I was telling this to the clinical team this morning. I was saying, one of the shifts that we tried to make at Evoke and Second Nature before that was, we're not going to make it a blaming thing. We're not going to be punitive to the parents. We're not going to be shaming. We're not going to get frustrated with them that they're getting in the way of the treatment plan or getting in the way of the child's growth. We're going to know that any Anything less than ideal from the parent and their parenting of their child comes from their own wounds. And why would we become frustrated, angry, or shaming at somebody for their wounds? And we'll stumble because we're human, but we're gonna commit to that practice. That anything I do, where I show up in my relationships with my family, those that I love, that you do, that you show up with it comes from a place of, at best, ignorance, not knowing, but most often some kind of wound. And then that's part of this broadcast tonight, is to kind of dig all of that up, dig up what's underneath everything. I'm going to share with you. There's a quote from Jamie Gills, my therapist. She goes by JD as her author name. It's from her book, Seeing and Intimacy in Psychotherapy. She says, of course, no one has come from a perfect context, whatever that might be. Therefore, each person will have dents and bruises left over from earlier experiences. It is wise to consider all dents and bruises important and worthy of compassion and understanding. Right? We dent our children. That's inevitable. And if we've learned to love our own horrible, rotten self, that is to say, our own humanness, if we're kind enough to ourselves, if we've learned and experienced enough self-compassion or compassion from others to internalize that as self-compassion, then our children can learn how to sort through their stuff with us. Right? We get to be present. But in the end, the wound and the dent is theirs now, and they have to sort it out. Related to this topic, I wrote this last week. It's really in response to so many clients, parents I've worked with over the years who are resistant to this look backwards, to this impact letter idea from child to parent. I wrote, it's possible to look to our past, to our wounds, without falling into a victim's mindset. It's not a search for blame, but rather a search for understanding and self-compassion. Our aversion at looking to our past, to our parents, may be because we are trying to protect them. We are carrying around our parents' defenses. Sigmund Freud said that therapy is freedom. Freedom from unconscious obligations. When we are allowed, when we don't have to carry around our parents' defenses, and it's unconscious. We don't experience it as our parents' defenses. We experience it as I don't want to play the victim. I don't want to blame, right? Those are the voices in our head. I don't want to make excuses. I put myself in this situation. I did the drugs. I got arrested. I ended up with depression, anxiety, whatever it is. That's how we experience it. But if we find ourselves in a context, a therapeutic relationship, a program, a relationship with a parent who's done some healing and some work, who says, no, it's okay. You can talk about it. I welcome it. It's important for you to talk about it. We can heal and we can move through it. This is, again, this kind of shift, this core insight into what it means to be an adequate or good parent. Alice Smith says, experience has taught us that we have only one enduring weapon in our struggle against mental illness, the emotional discovery of the truth about the unique history of our childhood. We have only one enduring weapon in our struggle against mental illness, the emotional discovery of the truth about the unique history of our childhood. We must try, she goes on to say, in a long process, to discover our own personal touch. A truth may cause pain before giving us a new sphere of freedom. If we choose instead to content ourselves with intellectual wisdom, we will remain in the sphere of illusion and self-deception. It takes a long time. It takes a long time. And it's a life's practice. And most people avoid it. And the reasons that they come up with for avoiding it are the defense. What I've come to know personally, and so far it's been 100%, is that the real motive for avoiding it is fear. Fear of what they'll discover, fear of what that means about them. Are they making excuses for themselves? Are they blaming? Are they a victim? It's fear to go through that muck. In Joseph Campbell's language, it's the dragons, it's the sentinels that stand guard and tell us to turn away. And we're sure if we cross that threshold that we'll be annihilated. And it's a psychological experience that just gets, that's the spiritual way of talking about it, but it's just really the experience of saying, I don't want to do it or I don't think it's important. Anybody who's done it will tell you it opens up the universe. Miller says most people will do exactly the opposite of looking to their past without realizing that the past is constantly determining their present actions. They avoid learning anything about their history. I've heard therapists say, well-respected therapists say, you got to look forward. That's just their defense. It's because they haven't done their work. If they had done their work, they would know what I wrote here. We don't look for blame when we look backwards. We look for understanding and self-compassion. And our aversion is about carrying around our parents' defense. So this is the work that you do. The discovery of self is the primary task in parenting. Without it, the discovery of yourself is the primary task in parenting. Without it, the parent will never know their limits, and neither will the child. Becoming a self in parenting means that the child will have to learn to live with an other. Living with an other will bring with it lessons critical for life: frustration tolerance, feeling feelings, empathy, delay of gratification. A common accusation of parents that send children to our program is how narcissistic, unempathetic, how selfish their child, how they disregard other people. And the only way we can teach them that is to show up with our limits. And we don't do it to teach them a lesson, but when we do it, they learn it. We do it because it's what life is. It's what being a person is. And it's terrifying because we're afraid if we do it that we're going to become all the things we were told by our parents and by our culture not to be. As you discover yourself, you begin to have a sense of the child's self. You are able to mentalize. What that means is understand the other's mental state, why they are doing what they are doing. I've said this in recent broadcasts, and I think it's so true. This pandemic, the social distancing, it really has forced everybody to look inward. And with it has come, of course, frustration, disappointment, depression, anxiety, but also what has come with it is insight and awareness. Because the blueprint for the universe is in here, in your head. The blueprint for understanding everything is in here. When you discover you at the deepest levels, it's like what Merlin said in the Knight in Rusty Armor. Because I know myself, I know you. I'm not reading your mind. Because I know myself, I know you. The inscription at the Apollo of Delphi, is that what it's called, I think? Know thyself. The metaphor, even in Star Trek, the final frontier, the metaphor of space is the self, the journey inward. Campbell says that the cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek. The cave is the self, who you are. It has the answers. And if you sit with somebody who can be patient with you in that journey, a therapist, ideally, if you can sit with somebody who can be patient, you can learn to do it. But if somebody's anxious to fix you and for you to get it right and to figure it out, not very safe. Not very safe to explore. The task in parenting then shifts from raising a good child. It shifts away from this, a good student, a good athlete, a good artist, a good person, to raising a self. It's the foundation for resiliency. A self is resilient. A good person is fragile. We know this from the growth mindset people. Google the growth mindset people. I did a broadcast on this too. Carol Dweck and resiliency. Children that that are told that they are gifted, that they're told that they are good, become more fragile. They crumble in the face of challenge or failure. Children whose entire self is embraced, including the failure, learn to pick themselves back up. But we have to learn to be comfortable with a really messy situation. Boundaries and consistency are the other things people tell us are the key to effective parenting. And these are built on a foundation of self. Boundaries and consistency, that's a very common part of parent education. But what I figured out is that's just evidence of a self. Healthy, flexible, consistent boundaries are evidence of a healthy self. So we start with the self. We heal ourselves, we repair, and we reparent the child in us. So we're able to accomplish these critical tasks in parenting. Boundaries are the key, but really they're the evidence of the underlying self that is or is not present in us, the parent. This all goes back to this whole broadcast tonight is about undoing what we've learned. Enlightenment is more about unlearning and undoing. We must be willing, like the serpent, to shed the skin of our understanding to grow. I talk about this in the book, The 3 Keys to Enlightenment. We learn to be okay with being wrong, and we get really good at losing. I mean, think about that in your marriage. If you get really good at losing, if losing becomes effortless, it doesn't become a threat to the ego. It doesn't mean that you're bad or unlovable or a failure. I was sharing this with an ultra successful person in business at one point, and they said, "I'll never get good at that." And I was able to show them right away, like, you've already had failures, and you've learned from them. You've told me about them, and you told me that nobody can really accomplish anything great without the experience of failure. Versus somebody who gets a setback and wants to give up. It's resiliency. That's what number 1 is. Number 2, come to know your darkness and remain on speaking terms with your mental illness. What I love about our family intensives, I love many things about them, but one of the things that I really, really love is that the parent does some of their work in front of their child. And then the child realizes, this isn't about me. My mom's anxiety, my dad's anger is not mine. They were mistreated as children, and they're still carrying around that wound. It's just being enacted on me, played out around me and my issues. I was talking to a client recently who we were talking about how we're all crazy. He was saying, I don't want to be the crazy one in this family. And I said, yeah, you're not the crazy one, but you're a crazy one in this family. You're all crazy. We're all crazy. He said, yeah, but I'm only 10% okay with being crazy. And I said, that's the goal of therapy, is to be 100% okay with being crazy. Because when you're 100% being okay with being crazy, you just get to set boundaries and be yourself. You just get to be who you are. You get to say no to people. Or yes. Or I love you, or I can't be treated this way. And it just is okay. And then they try to talk you out of it and tell you how you're wrong. And you say to them, in essence, I gave up being right a long time ago, so that the argument of me being wrong doesn't work anymore. I already know that I'm a crazy, neurotic, old-fashioned idiot, but I'm okay with all of that. And so I can just say no. I don't want to have sex. I don't want to do drugs. I don't want to participate in this or that. I don't want to be yelled at. And doesn't matter to me to be right. I can be crazy. Number 3, learn how to die again and again. Old context, beliefs, and relationships. We have to shed the skin, right? In myth and in storytelling, death becomes a motif of change, right? For the new self to emerge, right? In storytelling, death most often is not literal death. It is this idea that we're always becoming a new person. I wrote this a while back. Listen to children. They are telling you their dreams. Listening to a child's lies or exaggeration tells you something about what they cannot express, something they cannot access. Right? The heroic journey doesn't get us the widget. It gets us new ears and eyes. It develops new capacities and awarenesses in us. It allows us to hear what the child can't say, what the spouse can't say. Still offering them their dignity, still allowing us to stand in our own ground and in our own truth and with our own boundaries. I was talking about this too. Letting go is a difficult task. It's something that I have to go back to with my wife, my children, and my clients every day. Sometimes we can play a game in our heads and pretend that we don't know what somebody else's journey needs to be. Eventually, we may even start to believe that. Like I said to my wife this morning, I'm not perfect at it, but in the end, I go back to that practice. Right? I try to, I've had clients tell me that when you told me that you try not to have an opinion about your children, I thought you were crazy. I thought that's the job of a parent. And I think that is what many people are taught. You know how to mold your child up to be the way that they need to be. That's what we're taught. That's what our parents acted out on us. If everything goes well, your children are going to be larger than you. They're going to know things that you don't know. They're going to go beyond the horizons of your vision. That's the ideal, right? They're going to press against the limits of you. That's in part what their behavior is trying to tell us all. Dad, mom, this isn't working for me. I need something that I'm not getting. Can't have a discussion about parenting without boundaries, right? I wrote this weekend, 5 keys to healthy boundaries. My wife tells me I always have to do 5 or 7 or 8. 5 keys to healthy boundaries. Learning to balance compassion for our children's pain, discomfort, hurt, sadness, feelings. Learning to balance compassion for our children's pain while maintaining accountability is a critical feature in parenting and attachment, right? That's the combination of being a self and loving another. Key number 1, boundaries are not for changing others, but derive from a parent's sense of self, as in, this is what I feel good about. This is what I need in this situation. We start to learn to take care of ourselves, and the child has to deal with that. It's not a huge shift between the consequences sometimes or the specific behaviors. It just comes from a different place. It comes from a place of self-care, not me knowing your truth, but I'm not comfortable with you going out with that person. I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with that. It also becomes unarguable. And you model for the child. This is the most amazing thing. You model for them what it's like to be a self, so they can't be peer pressured, right? That it's just okay to be you. Key 2, don't make it about being right, but rather about being a self, as in, I may be crazy, old-fashioned, or an idiot, but this is my boundary. This is the most powerful position we can take, and it sets an example to our children for resisting peer pressure. So when someone says to them, you're being crazy, you're being a prude, you're not being fun, their response is, I'm okay with that. In my family, it was just okay to feel what I felt, and I didn't have to be right. Key 3, similar to key 2, don't explain your decisions or boundaries to your children in the effort. Don't explain it to them in the effort to get them to agree with or be okay with a boundary. Don't say, I'm doing this for your own good or because I love you. Because you're trying to get them to like it, to buy into it, to feel differently about it, to see that it comes from a good place. I'm going to take a tangent right now because it reminded me of something we were talking about as a family, about this idea that parents sometimes say, I had the best of intentions. I hear that phrase from people about their parents or loved ones. They had the best of intentions. And my response is, no, they weren't. They weren't bad intentions, but they weren't the best of intentions. They were just to manage anxiety and fear. It was just self-care. But in this particular instance that you're describing, usually it comes up in this instance, It was hurtful. It was painful, maybe even abusive. The best of intentions, again, is the parent's defense. It's the parent needing to be a good person. Just this is the whole premise of tonight's broadcast, just really not knowing what it means to be a good parent. Key four, listen to them as much as you're able and no more. Listen to them as much as you are able. Respond with genuine empathy and allow them to be angry, hurt, or upset with you and your decisions. As in, I get it. You're angry, upset, and it makes sense. I'm sorry this is so hard, and I'm glad you're telling me how you feel. Or simply listen and be silent, and it's all implied. The idea is people get to feel what they feel. They don't have to take care of you. They don't have to think a certain thing about you, feel a certain thing about you for you to be okay. You take on the responsibility of the being okay part of you. Key five, don't use your emotions to try to get children to change. When you do this, you are telling the child that your feelings are their responsibility. This is key. This is fundamental to self-development, to child development. Do not use your emotions. I'm frustrated, scared, angry, happy, proud. Do not use your emotions to try to get children to change. When you do this, you are telling the child that your feelings are their responsibility. This will lead them to believe that what others think about them and feel about them is about them, and it's theirs to manage. Don't say, as in, I'm angry, scared, or hurt, as a substitute for boundary setting. One of the most common complaints in the treatment of adolescents and young adults is how susceptible somebody is, how somebody's sense of self is so fragile and fleeting, and how they care what others think. They're vulnerable to peer pressure. That's a common complaint, characteristic that parents worry about, complain about with their children. We started it. If you think it's your job to make your parents proud, if you think or you wear heavily your parents' disappointment, guess what? Your brain believes that what other people think about you, your friends, your peers, your colleagues, your partners, your spouses, you think that what they think and feel is about you, and it's not. Mental health and healing is when we begin to understand that people's reactions, strong reactions to us, are a reflection of the relationship with themselves, not about us. But if we were raised in a house where mother and dad's happiness or fear or frustration or anger was ours to manage, we had to stop doing drugs so mom could sleep at night. We had to do well in school so dad didn't wring his hands all the time. That the way that we were doing, the way that we knew we were doing the wrong thing is if dad was angry or if dad was proud. We go out into the world with very little sense of self. And then the only thing we look into is the faces of others for a reflection of how we're doing and who we are. Until some of us find a place, a support group, a wise mentor or sponsor, a therapist, where they love all of us. The narcissistic injury, not narcissism, but the narcissistic injury of not being seen as a child. That's a core wound of a child. It's not about being overvalued. That's not what creates entitlement and narcissism. It's about valuing the wrong thing in a child, a part of the child, their beauty, their intelligence, their giftedness, their cooperation. And so when we find a therapist or a support group, they see all of us. They value and honor all of us, including our warts, our mistakes, our idiocies. And we know what this is like because we know it in our stories. The movie The Two Popes last year, where the outgoing pope admitted that he knew about the abuse of the new pope and really put him on the spot to demonstrate God's grace. Or to the story in the musical Les Mis, when Jean Valjean steals from the bishop, gets caught, and brought back the next morning. And the bishop says to the police officer, no, I gave him those things. In fact, he forgot to take the most valuable thing. He forgot to take the silver candlesticks. We know it in our stories. We recognize what that grace can feel like, right? I said to my therapist this morning, how great would it be for you if you did something really stupid for the 50th time and somebody's response to you was, how are you doing? Are you okay? And all of my therapists just nodded. Lastly, we can say we are sorry when we fail. Every parent has limits, and every child will discover the end of those limits. It's called being human. We can say sorry when we fall short of the ideal, and with this, the child learns perhaps the most important lesson of all, what it means to be human. Right? That's the model we show to them. So this is rare. Most of us weren't shown it. Probably close to none of us were shown it. It's not in our culture. Consistently, it's not in our movies, in our books. It terrifies us. We think that this way of thinking will lead children to become ignorant, hedonistic, lawless, selfish, self-centered people. It has just the opposite effect. The effect of this kind of love, this kind of compassion, capacity built on the foundation of a self and a parent, makes a child want to go out there and just love everybody. It's what I think that Princess Di probably did to her children. I think. I don't know, but it looks like it. Gandhi, Mother Teresa, right? It's what people do when they're offered grace. They just want to give it. They want to take everybody to that place and show them. Okay, live questions. One person asked, would you recommend a family to repeat this exercise years after a vote? As the child grows, they might have had to say a new perspective. It really, yes, great question. It really is a way of being. The exercise, the tool itself is just a moment in time. My good friend and colleague and advisor, Sanford Shapiro, who might be on this tonight, says don't confuse the impact letter with the principle. Don't confuse the hopes and intentions letter with the principle. Don't confuse the assignment. He's a learning specialist that advises a vote. And he makes it clear to us, don't misunderstand the tool. It's just a tool. So yes, it's a way of being. After I do these broadcasts, after I get home from a family intensive, I'll often sit with my kids and ask them questions about how I hurt them. We had discussions about this week because I was preparing this broadcast where everybody knows Dad's an idiot. And it doesn't make me ineffective or powerless. It actually makes me stronger. I just get to have boundaries. And the argument over Dad being an idiot is settled. Dad's an idiot. Someone asked, where does the fierce instinct to protect our parents, all while so being annoyed from them, come from? It comes from, that's a great question. Read drama that gets a child to learn more. But basically, if a child doesn't protect the parent will abandon the child and the child will die. That's the simple answer. If the child doesn't show up in a way that the parent can tolerate, the child risks abandonment and the child is vulnerable and will die. That's where it comes from. And then it just gets passed down. I mean, that stuff, kids feeling guilty and feeling bad and apologizing to parents, that sells well to the culture. There are programs out there. There are programs yelling at kids. There are programs confronting kids on their defenses, which are really their wounds, their protection for their wounds. There are parents encouraging there are programs encouraging parents to get angry at kids. There are programs out there still telling parents to write impact letters to children, which we do not do. There are people telling us that we don't get it, and you can decide for yourself. The thing that works with this work is it's true. It's true the minute you hear it. And when you live in a what they call a strict father family, it's another gender mistake probably, but when you live in a authoritarian society, a patriarchal society, a power-based society, It can have religion or not have religion, right? Doesn't matter. But when you live in that society, then mom and dad are right and kids are wrong. But read any of the great teachers and you'll hear them. You'll recognize them because they'll lean into this, what we're talking about, what I'm talking about. Somebody says, I am curious if there's a difference in starting doing your work while your children are still young, as opposed to when they are already teenagers or young adults. It is harder for the child to see and feel the shift in the relationship when they are older. My son can already see and feel the changes I am making, but I believe it is only because he has gone through treatment and has done his own work. My teenage daughter, however, does not seem to be feeling it. She still expects me to be reactive and defensive most of the time, even when I am not. How long before your loved ones can see the changes you are making? It takes longer. The earlier you start, the better off, right? It's never too late. It's never too early. I've told this story before, but it's simple. I came home from a trip. The babysitter was watching. My wife was out doing something. The babysitter was watching the child. My now 12-year-old, she was 3 or 4 at the time, ran into the laundry room and hid from me. And the babysitter said to a nice woman, gentle, kind woman, didn't have any idea about what being an adequate parent was. Said to my daughter, "Don't run and hide from your dad. Show him that you love him." And I said to her, I turned to the babysitter, I said, "That's not how we do it in this home." I tell the story of my son when he was 4 or 5, and we were watching Disney's Peter Pan, the cartoon. And he turned to me during a scene with Captain Hook and he said, "Captain Hook isn't bad, Dad. He's just sad, right?" And I said, "Right." They can learn it early. It's a way of being. You know the story of Lucy. For those of you that are old enough to remember the Peanuts cartoon, and you remember Lucy and Charlie Brown, and she would hold the football for Charlie Brown and convince Charlie Brown to try to kick it, and he would finally, against his better judgment, go ahead and try to kick it, and then she would pull it away at the last second. And as a little kid, I was thinking, please, Charlie Brown, don't kick it, don't kick it, don't kick it. But then when he was going to kick it, I was saying, please, Lucy, don't pull it away. That's your daughter. That's your daughter. She thinks it's going to be pulled away. So you show patience. When somebody doesn't trust us because they've been hurt with us, you have unending patience for them. They get to heal on their time frame, not yours. They get to trust on your time frame, not yours. That's what we do. Thank you for that. Someone says, can you talk about the myths from your book? I'm not sure which ones you're talking about, so you might have to share those. I'll ask that person to resubmit the question. You can put it back up at the top, Leah. Someone else asked, you were saying to not tell your kids you are sad or upset or scared, but isn't that the idea behind giving I feel statements? It's a misinterpretation of the I feel statements. It's about why you're doing it. Okay? If you're trying to teach your children, I tell this story often. I had a new staff member, enthusiastic, loved nature. We arrived at a campsite one evening and there was cryptobiotic soil everywhere. And if you step on it, it takes, I think, 50,000 years. And it's the basis of life. I think I'm saying that right. Some scientists on the broadcast will tell me it's 500 years, but whatever. It takes years. I think it's 500 years. But anyway, if you step on it, it dies. So this young, enthusiastic field staff comes up to me and says, I want to call a group. And I said, why? And he said, because everybody's not paying. We have rules about walking in single file lines between the sleeping area and the eating area. So you do as little damage to the environment as possible. This staff loved the environment, said, I want to call a group and share an I feel statement. And I said, why? He said, I want them to stop walking. And I said, well, it's not their job to take care of you. So let's set a boundary. You can tell them how they feel, but just give them the boundary and say, look, if you guys don't do this, we're going to have to move to a site that's seen more traffic, that's not as delicate as the site that we're at right now. Just set a boundary. Right? I would often be on hikes with kids, and We have an ethic where we pick up trash as we go. And so, the group kind of gets spread out along a trail with staff spread out all amongst them, with somebody at the back and the front watching. And I'm doing a session in the back usually. And I walk across some trash sitting on the trail that would have been picked up if we'd followed our ethic, would have been picked up by the student at the front or one of the 9 students and 3 staff. So I call everybody back and I just say, well, somebody pick up the trash. And they look at me like I'm crazy, and someone picks up the trash. And then I say, let's keep going. Like, you don't have to make a big deal or give a speech. I talk about this quite a bit, that I'm almost at the point where I tell parents not to tell their children how they feel. And parents get really triggered by that and upset and confused because they think there's so much education that that's what you do with children. Read my first book on the chapter on communication. I talk about it all over the place. We don't use emotion to try to coerce children. That's the kind of thing they don't recover from well. They can recover from various levels of boundaries and consequences. They don't do well when they think mom and dad's feelings are their responsibility. So if we do share feelings, we do it in the context of self-care and clarity and to let it go. But we say to our children, it's not your responsibility, it's mine. I was triggered. I'm scared. I have to take care of it. I was angry. That's mine. And I think there is a misunderstanding. Oh, somebody asks about the myths about human being on page 202. I will make that its own broadcast. I actually included it on here tonight, and then I took it off at the last moment because it would have taken its own. That will be an entire webinar itself. I'll go through each one of them one by one in 2 weeks, the one after next. How do we reparent ourselves? Somebody asks. You show up to somebody who can see and love all of you and accept all of you. Not a part object, not the good parts of yourself, the successful parts of you, all of you. They don't react or freak out or get angry or disappointed or impatient. They just see and understand you. And after a while, you start to heal. You start to integrate. You start to become a whole person. So you reparent yourself by giving yourself the gift of showing up somewhere where it's okay to be you. And there aren't as many therapists as I would like that do that work. They don't know that that's the work. They think the job is to fix you and get you on your way, right? To kind of shape you up. But you can just tell them you already had a parent for that. Last question, then I'll get to the upcoming events. What about when your child doesn't stop arguing when you state that you are or aren't comfortable with, gets in your face and demands a different answer? Obviously, if things escalate, there are boundaries and consequences, right? And sometimes you're going to blow a fuse. I raised my voice at my daughter the other day, and she said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I screwed up. I didn't think you were hearing me." And she went on to explain, she's 12. She went on to explain how it was bad parenting, and I agreed with her. But you do what you can. You do the best you can. You set boundaries and consequences. The shift, the child that won't get out of your face and keeps arguing with you, this shift will take time to extinguish that behavior. And in behavioral theory, there's something called an extinction burst, which is when we stop reinforcing old behaviors, they tend to escalate. So initially, everybody in your life that you begin to send a healthier boundary with, the behavior will get worse first. It's kind of like turning a big boat. It's a slow process, but you're changing a culture. You're changing a mindset. You're changing a way of being, and that takes time to show effect and outcome. All right, our intensives are online now. So the first one, or the next available one coming up is May 15th through 17th. So it will fill up May 15th through 17th. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. We hope to open up after the state opens up and we feel like it's safe and the directions from the CDC are clear, we'll open up to in-person intensives and we'll announce those dates. Our parent support group's coming up online. We have one Wednesday, April 29th and one Thursday, May 6th for wilderness families. For intensive families, if you've been to an intensive, Wednesday, April 22nd is the next one. That's this Wednesday, 6 p.m. So just email Malia at evoketherapy.com for information and to get the link if you don't have it to any of these if you're an alumni. Our parent workshops are temporarily suspended. Our pursuits program is also temporarily suspended. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. This is a place to be reparented. Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, adultchildren.org. All of those places are wonderful places to get reparented. Refugerecovery.org, a Buddhist-inspired recovery program. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has local chapters in your area with free classes and resources. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. So just look for Finding You and Evoke Therapy podcast on your favorite podcast app, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram by searching @Evoke Therapy, or you can find the Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram by searching @Evoke Therapy Intensives. Evoke Therapy programs can be found by searching it on Facebook and the Evoke Family Foundation. If you search that, you can find the organization that helps people that can't afford therapy. It's a charity organization that was created by alumni families. The Evoke Therapy blog is available each week. My newest book is on Amazon, and it's available at the lowest possible cost that Amazon will allow during the pandemic. So it's only $2.99 for Kindle, or $10.02 for print. We've also reduced The Journey of the Heroic Parent to $12.95 during the pandemic. So those two are available there. I'm going to be talking about a book that we're focusing on at Evoke now for the next month. All of our groups, all of our therapists, I'll be focusing on this. So The Letters of Juliet to the Knight in Rusty Armor. Your assignment, should you choose to attend, between now and then is to read The Knight in Rusty Armor by Robert Fisher. So on Monday night, it'll take you about hour and a half if you're a slow reader. It takes me about an hour and a half. I'm a slow reader. On Monday, April 27th, I will be going over The Letters of Juliet. This is a sequel written by my therapist, I think in 1993, if I'm not mistaken, about the other side of the story. The wife that was left home after the husband went off on this quest to remove the armor that was stuck to him. Somebody says, are the intensives on Zoom? Yes, the intensives are on Zoom. You will see each other. It'll be the same. We're doing groups of 5 right now. It'll be the same 5 people, the entire intensive. So thank you for joining us. Excellent participation, attendance, questions, fantastic. If I didn't get to your questions, I'll answer them in an upcoming broadcast. Malia, I won't exit out of here, and you can save all those or screenshot those as you need, so we can do a Q&A real soon and answer all these questions. So look for that on an upcoming webinar broadcast, or all of these get turned into the next morning. All of these get turned into a podcast on our podcast app, Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. Take care. Thank you for showing up, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.